Thanks, Alon. Thank you very much for joining me today. I see a lot of people have jumped on the Leaf bandwagon again. I'm on that. But the bar has been set high after I saw that poll. I was just, after 5 years of no playoffs, I'm just looking for 8th place this year so we can see them go into May or June. Well, I'd like to walk you through a decision framework that was developed last year and first unveiled at this event last year that helps organizations make decisions around mobile platforms and ensure that you're developing and planning for the devices and users out there in the Canadian market. And we'll start with the consumer perspective, so the B2C perspective, if you will, but also talk about how that relates to the B2E, the business to employee side of things. So there's two spheres, and as Alon pointed out, they are very closely related and coming much closer together today and very quickly. So how are consumer trends impacting B2E decisions? Well, take a look at this picture. This is interesting. There's 3 observations I can make from this right off the bat. One is you have 3 people in a social setting at a coffee shop, but they're actually looking at their devices. So that's not uncommon in today's world. But it really speaks to the changing communication formats and the socialization of mobile in our lives. The second point is, I don't know if you can see from here, but they each have a different type of handset. So there's a lot of choice out there. And it is driven by their own personality, their use, their preferences. So we have to take that into consideration. And third, they could be meeting for business or pleasure. And I think that's perhaps the most important thing to take away, and that's just how the two worlds, the work and life, or work and play, are merging together. And so what's happening in the B2C world is going to inform you in your business to enterprise or business to employee decision making. And really, simply put, the mobile device is really being developed into an accessory with great intensity in terms of usage, and it's not going away. Alon talked about the rapid rise of technologies and how quickly that's occurring in modern day society. We need to take that into consideration when we're talking about development of applications and mobile in the workplace as well. So let's talk about the framework. And there's 2 spheres to the framework, as I talked about. One is we'll go from the B2C side, understanding the total mobile opportunity in Canada, understanding platforms, what devices are out there installed today, and what's happening near term and long term in terms of the mobile channel and where platforms and devices are going. And then we'll take it down to the employee and enterprise implications. So the decision framework is really a way to guide your decision making around 4 key metrics in the Canadian market. And all of the data presented today, except for I think 1 chart, is Canadian-based. So it really provides that context for those of you who are trying to serve a consumer or business base in Canada. And this is a very logical 4-step process that Brandon presented last year, and we've refreshed the data this year to provide a context. Most of the data is from the mid-year of 2011, so the 2nd quarter ending. We happen to be jumping right into the 3rd quarter data reporting. But I think this is a great place to start. So let's walk through this. The mobile opportunity. What is the size of the smartphone marketplace in Canada, and where is that growing to in the next 4 to 5 years? And what do the demographics look like? So let's start with that piece. So today, or at the end of 2011, we expect there to be about 26.7 million handsets, mobile phones in the marketplace today. We've seen tremendous growth, and this is total handsets, so a mix of smartphones, those with more advanced operating systems, as well as feature phones or more basic phones that are still in use in the marketplace. And that's going to grow to about 34 million in 2015. So this is the Canadian install base in millions. So that's the overall market opportunity. But what's really been happening and will continue to shape decision-making and the marketplace is the growth of smartphones with advanced operating systems that can run independent applications that have all the sensors and instrumentation that Alon pointed out, and more innovations coming. We're also seeing rapid rise in smartphone adoption, triggered by the advancements in the wireless network in Canada. We've gone from being viewed as a bit of a laggard in terms of wireless data connections to being one of the leaders in terms of the rollout of LTE this year in several major cities. So just huge leaps and bounds in terms of innovation on the wireless side. So we're going to see the smartphone install base grow from about 11 million last year to over 29 million in 2015. So a massive change in terms of the mix of users and customers that you can reach either with your applications or content through a much more advanced device than, say, a feature phone, which was the norm in the last decade. And that transition point, the inflection, is happening this year, right about now, where smartphones will outnumber feature phones in the Canadian install base. So we can also then take a look at the demographics. What is the mix of the smartphone user today? And this comes from our consumer data. And it really is, and comparing to last year, it's really skewed towards the higher end of the income bracket. So almost half of smartphone users that we surveyed have an annual income of over $75,000 in Canada. That's much above the average in Canada. So you are definitely looking at a higher income family or income user in terms of the opportunity to reach your customers on a smartphone through an application or a content or some other value-added service. Another demographic split that we can take is an age split. Smartphones are still being adopted by the Gen X, the Gen Y, the millennials, and they make up about 68% of the market. Only 4% of smartphone users right now are over 65. That's changing. In fact, if you took a look at tablets, you're going to see a much higher adoption or proportion of users that are in the older age demographics. So these are two demographic splits that you can take into consideration when planning your development platforms. But there are other ways you can look at it, and we have a lot more detail in the appendix, but there are regional splits or male-female splits, and what we're seeing there is Canadian men are still adopting smartphones faster than women. That shift hasn't changed largely in the last couple of years. We're also seeing a different mix of adoption of smartphones by region. Quebec was lagging, partly due to access and cultural differences, but they're catching up. And the rollout of Videotron's wireless network has helped increase the adoption of smartphones in Quebec in the last year specifically. And there are many other demographic splits that you could take depending on what you're interested in terms of targeting your market. Okay, so the second step, mobile platforms. What platforms should you invest and build on? And that's perhaps one of the hottest topics we've fielded questions on this year at IDC is what's the horse race look like in terms of mobile OSs? Again, this is only handsets. We have a bunch of research that looks at desktops and mobile PCs, and also a different set of research that my colleague Krista Napier, who's at the back of the room, does looking at media tablets. But today we're looking just at mobile handsets and smartphones in particular. The market platform can be, you can form your decision making based on two main factors. So what's the people penetration, and what kind of stuff are they doing? What content and user activity are they doing on these different platforms? Because it varies, and it will change how you look at your customer if they have an iPhone versus a BlackBerry. And that will help inform your investment recommendation. Which platform should we invest in, and what's the spending allocation? So let's take a look at the people in terms of mobile OS share in the install base. This isn't shipments, this is actual users as of the middle of this year. So BlackBerry continues to be the #1 base of users on smartphones at 44%. Apple iPhone, iOS at 30%, followed by Android, which has basically come from nowhere to 17% of users today in Canada. Now, what's the picture going to look like in 2015? What we're seeing then is a big portion of growth moving to Android. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is Android's rapid growth very recently is a supply-side shift. So you have LG and Samsung, HTC, Sony Ericsson, and a couple of other vendors really moving what used to be a feature phone running a basic operating system and shifting a lot of those handsets to Android. So LG, for instance, next year, their feature phone mix will probably be less than 20% of what they ship. So Android's made up of a number of different OEMs, obviously. BlackBerry is still going to hold about a fifth of the marketplace in terms of install base in Canada. And iOS will be about a quarter, so a slightly smaller portion of a much larger pie. So that's the overall install base mix. The other thing to keep in mind is there's some consolidation. So we're seeing Symbian go away, HP's WebOS go away in terms of install base on handsets. That's our forecast. Now things could change. And Windows Phone being about 8% by 2015. And that's a big wild card. I mean, IDC globally projected pretty strong growth of Nokia and Microsoft, and we're still waiting for some of those products to hit the Canadian market. But that's a big consideration, and it could swing considerably depending on how they do in the next couple of years. So doing stuff. What are the activities that people can do on a smartphone? And it varies quite differently. This is one piece of secondary research that we have. This isn't IDC data. It comes from StatsCounter. StatsCounter is a web analytics company, and they provide, or they pick up the type of browser and mobile OS being accessed on hundreds of thousands of websites in Canada, millions in fact. And they can determine, okay, there are handsets out there that are more likely to be consuming content and applications on the mobile web. And so you see the dominance of Apple's iPhone in terms of activities and web consumption on a mobile OS, followed by BlackBerry and Android. So despite the fact of Android's growth in Canada, we don't see as much content download and activity on the mobile browser to date. But that'll likely change as we see a different demographic growing in the Android space and a different set of phones and functionalities coming as Android evolves from where it is today. Another aspect to consider is the app availability, so the supply side. Many developers around the world, and this is a worldwide stat from Distimo, are focused on two major platforms. That's iOS and Android for the handset. So this informs you in terms of, where can we see scale and revenue opportunity? Where are developers gravitating to in terms of developing on a mobile OS? And it's a much smaller base when you go past those top two brands in the platform space. So the next part of the decision framework are the mobile devices. What devices should you provide coverage and test on? Because the experience will be very different. And that's one challenge in the marketplace today. There's so many different handsets out there. The user experience will vary from device to device. Even in a family of devices, like BlackBerry, you have different screen sizes, different operating systems, different inputs, and the ability to even access LTE is limited today to just, I believe, one handset in the marketplace in Canada. But that will change rapidly over time. So this is being informed by our mobile phone market tracker. We measure market share and look at the install base and usage on a handset basis in Canada. So first looking at the BlackBerry picture, we know that the Pearl is probably the most used handset in Canada, but because it's not typically used by a higher end user, doesn't have some of the access capabilities, and the screen size is limited, the recommendation is that shouldn't be a big focus. So the top three that you should focus on in terms of testing would be the Curve 3G, the Torch 9800, and the Bold 9700 because of its much more robust build and screen size. And these are also, by the way, the second, third, and fourth most commonly used handsets in Canada on the BlackBerry side. If you're focused on iOS, the top three handsets installed in Canada today are iPhone 4, the 32 gig version, 16 gig version, and then we still have a number of iPhone 3GSs. Now this is going to the end of Q2. we expect a huge spike in the iPhone 4S based on the launch just a few weeks ago. So that's going to change. But right now, iPhone 4 did very well. We saw a lot of new users moving to iPhone last year, iPhone 4, and the different models of iPhone 4 as of mid-year were about 50% of the marketplace, of the user base. On Android, this is certainly the most fragmented user base. You have many different OEMs layer on their own code over top of different versions of the Android operating system. But the top 3 handsets in market today are the LG Optimus One, Samsung Galaxy S Vibrant, and the Samsung Nexus S. There's also a large install base. I think 4th place would be the HTC Magic. So there are 4 major handsets to look at there. And then a much smaller user base in the Windows Phone patch would be Samsung Focus, LG Quantum, and HTC HD7. So if you're looking at specific handsets, and we have a lot more detail in terms of the total install base, the percentage, the mix of use across the long tail of handsets, if you will, across all of these platforms and more. Sure.
What does this mix look like in the U.S.? This is Canada. Do you happen to have an idea of how, what people are buying?
The U.S. has a much, a different mix for a variety of reasons, but one of the big ones is the push on Android a couple of years ago by Verizon as a competitive counter to AT&T's exclusive iPhone meant that the Android mix was much, much higher. I don't have the data here with me today, but, and I don't know the handset model numbers, in fact, but Android as a family of devices, there would be a much bigger install base there in the US, and a higher Apple install base too. And obviously the iPhone 4 would be a huge base of US users today. So the last piece is the mobile channel, or the manufacturing, the OEMs, and how are the OEMs informing the market? And one way to look at it is what are recent shipment trends? So what are the very recent Q2 trends in terms of the top selling brands, and then what's that going to look like, and what should we look for in the next year or so? So when you look at the second quarter share, and these are shipments into the Canadian channel, so to carriers in Canada, the biggest sellers were Apple and the family, if you will, of Android devices. So Android claimed the #1 slot at 34%, but it was effectively tied with Apple. So Android had the benefit of Motorola, Sony Ericsson, HTC, and LG. Those handset brands on the smartphone side basically tied Apple's total share. Nokia still hasn't released a Windows Phone 7 device in Canada, but it was still selling some Symbian devices in the second quarter, and they made about 6% share. RIM is really exhibiting resilience in the Canadian market, being their home base. Great loyalty in terms of larger organizations. We saw at the outset which handsets you folks were using, and still very much dominated in the business market. So, and that continues. A big component of that loyalty is BlackBerry Messenger, and that continues to be a sticky component of why people stay with BlackBerry. Windows Phone, effectively 0 shipments in the second quarter in Canada, and I think that would be the low point for Microsoft in terms of its OS, but things are going to turn around. Canada will be later in terms of the roadmap for Windows Phone devices with Nokia, but it is coming, and we expect LG and Samsung to as well. So right now, Nokia has no Windows Phone products, but that's coming soon. So what's the roadmap looking like in terms of the different operating systems on smartphones? So in BlackBerry, you're going to want to focus on any devices with BlackBerry 7 OS. That was a big launch in the third quarter. And future BBX, so that's the QNX, the operating system that they acquired that runs the playbook and will be combined with the best features of the BlackBerry OS onto smartphones, onto the handsets. On the iOS side, definitely iPhone 4S. That's a big product, huge launch this past month. So that's going to be key in terms of what you want to test for and develop on. And anything running iOS 5. Android, they have their great catchy names for their latest operating systems. So Gingerbread is Android 2.3, I believe. There's an operating system that is actually separate or more geared towards tablets. That's Honeycomb, a different set of devices that's geared for. But also on the handset side, Ice Cream Sandwich. So that was launched just a couple of weeks ago. So that's the next version for handsets. I believe LG will have a version coming out in the next few months. So that you've got to keep those different versions of Android on the radar as well. And then Windows Phone, there's an update to Windows Phone 7 Mango that's currently rolling out. And then Windows Phone 8, I don't think we have a launch date for that, but that's something in the year ahead. And as I mentioned, to watch Nokia and how well they do, because they're making a big bet on Windows Phone. So that kind of wraps up the big picture in terms of the handset shipment and install base trend on the total market. And as Alon said, that really helps shape what consumers are doing and bringing into the enterprise. So what's the decision making looking like in the enterprise, and what's the status of Canadian organizations today? So one way to look at that is the mobile platforms supported by Canadian businesses. And this comes from a survey just in June of this year for Canada. We see the dominance still of BlackBerry OS at over 50%, but Android and iOS are being supported in the enterprise increasingly so. So these numbers, Apple and Android have basically doubled since last year. And when you dig a little deeper into the data, what's very interesting is small business is much more likely to adopt and support Android and iOS in their business environment. So we see the large business market, largely financial services, big government, education, and utility sectors being very much BlackBerry shops, but lots of Canadian organizations in the smaller end of the spectrum picking up Apple and Android. Now on the development side, and this comes from a worldwide developer survey that we do at IDC annually, or quarterly actually, we ask developers, what's your preference and where are you developing in terms of your application focus in the enterprise? And iPhone and Android are the top two highest interest areas for developers today. And this is specifically asked about the enterprise. So a big shift into the enterprise. In fact, all developers from a year ago, only 10% said they were developing for enterprise applications, and that's already jumped to 40% focused on enterprise. So Alon pointed out the shift in terms of the marketplace looking at B2C and now looking internally at B2E. This exact same shift is happening on the development side. So very interesting shift. I think a lot of experimentation happened in the consumer market. You created new user experiences. It's almost like a seed has been planted amongst the millions of smartphone users out there that they now understand and are familiar with many of the functions because of their activity on the B2C side, and that's now coming into the enterprise. BYOD, a very hot topic this year in our research. Bring your own device. And there's a big effect in terms of bringing your smartphone, your tablet, even different brands of mobile PCs are coming into the office because the user wants to use the tools that they're most comfortable with and make them most productive and ties them back to their social setting. So over 40% of Canadian organizations already currently support personal smartphones on the corporate network. So that's a huge leap. If you think about, effectively 6 or 7 years ago, the smartphone as we talk about it today didn't exist. And now 40% of organizations are allowing them to come in to the enterprise and supporting that. And then another 11% or so plan to add that BYOD support in the next year. So huge growth in terms of that change. And what's driving this? Well, years ago, it used to be, the new college kid came and they want to bring their smartphone and use Microsoft Windows Messenger. Well, now it's coming from the top. Executives are saying, please, can you support this? Asking IT, please support this. It's not a choice that somebody wants to turn down their CEO if they're planning to bring in their iPad or their iPhone and be supported on the corporate network. So it's coming from the top, and that's changing the mindset of IT. Employees are already using them anyhow, so it's difficult to stop. So the decision goes from, okay, do we prevent this, to how can we best manage it? Number 3 is improving work-life balance and flexibility. And cost is down the list. And there were a number of other reasons, but really it's coming from the top, and that's something that the IT department and the CIO cannot ignore anymore. And then we asked on a Canadian consumer survey, those people who are employed in business, do you have any concerns about using personal electronic devices for work purposes? And the majority said no. So both sides of the equation, both the businesses are being more open to supporting it, and consumers are saying, yeah, I'd like to bring it in, and I have no qualms with that. So this 69%, we expect that to increase. So a huge juggernaut of devices coming in the side door of the organization. And this brings us back to the beginning where I talked about meeting for work or pleasure, and really what we're talking about is a growing and changing mobile workforce, and that's something to keep in mind. So a framework for you to consider is, what is the mix of your mobile workforce? What is the mix of non-office-based mobile worker, or the traditional field worker, if you will? Most of the mobile developments in enterprise in the last decade were geared to this group of employees. But we're forecasting in Canada the office-based mobile worker, probably very similar to many of you, to be the largest component and the fastest growing in absolute terms, and then telecommuters being the fastest growing portion of the mobile workforce in percentage terms. So this brings back Alon's points about context. You have to think about the function that the mobile user is doing. What's their job function? What are the tools they need? What are the applications? What location are they at? What different instrumentation and sensing devices can you deploy on applications to make them most productive, and also keep that balance of work and play and that life flexibility. And it should also inform the device types that you roll out. So a big thing here is we have a taxonomy that's much more detailed in terms of understanding the mobile user, but take a look at your own organization and say, what are the different types of workers I need to support? What are the handsets they're using in their consumer lives? And we can serve and be most productive by understanding that. So just to wrap up, bringing theory into practice, obviously the mobile picture is in flux. You've seen the shifts in the operating system landscape, and it's going to continue to change in the next 2 years. So it's really important to keep on top of those trends, understanding where your consumer market is moving and what preferences are being brought into the enterprise. The consumer market shapes the enterprise, so having those two spheres, use a decision framework for those two spheres as they are very closely interrelated. Consider the context of both work and play, and also I think the best organizations have a balance between trialing new technology, new mobile apps and new platforms, but also managing change with different tools and policies, and looking around you and seeing what other people are doing and looking for best practices. So thank you very much for your time. I'm available for questions. Krista Napier on my team and Steve Yang are also here with me. Steve works in the mobile phone and communications sector, and Krista covers media tablets. So we'll be staying for the break, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time.